Today's lesson, today's objective, we are going to investigate bridges. Now, why are we talking about bridges? Well, because bridges have everything to do with science. In fact, let's look at what we talked about last class. So we've been talking about how to describe force. We learned that every single action we do is a force, and that is a fancy way of saying a push or a pull. We know all forces have a strength and a direction, and that when objects are in contact, they apply or exert force on each other. We also know that when a force is greater, when one force is greater than the opposite force, it causes the object to move in its direction, and we call that an unbalanced force. So in the high five example, we have two forces that are pushing toward each other. They are pushing together, one to the left, one to the right. The strength is equal, it looks like, and that covers that example. In the tug-of-war example, one force is greater than the other, and so it's causing the person on our right to probably move toward the direction of the stronger force to the left. So in this one, it's an unbalanced force because one force is greater than the other. With unbalanced forces, like I just said, one force is greater than the other, and that causes objects to move. So here's an example of unbalanced pulls. In this case, the dog is pulling harder than the child, and so the child moves in the direction of the dog. This is another unbalanced force, but with unbalanced pushes. Okay, so these two are going to have an arm wrestle match, and the girl is pushing harder than the other character, and so is moving his arm down. So this is an unbalanced force because one is stronger than the other, and it's causing the object, in this case the arm, to move. Okay, now let's talk about balanced forces. These are when two forces are the same strength and they go in opposite directions, and so the objects do not move. So with looking at the same scenario of pulling a dog on a leash, if both the owner and the dog pull in opposite directions, one goes right, one goes left, but they're pulling with equal amount of strength, then neither the dog nor the owner are going to move. They're both pulling in opposite directions as hard as they can, but they're equal in strength, and so they end up not moving at all. So the key basically is that unbalanced forces cause things to move. Balanced forces, things do not move. Let's take a look at another balanced force, repeating the same arm wrestle scenario. So these are balanced pushes. If both parties are pushing just as hard toward each other, then neither one ends up moving because the force is equal. So it is unbalanced and balanced forces that are at play in engineering bridges. So this is something that we use in everyday life. You need science. You need to be able to have balanced force to build a good bridge. You don't want this kind of scenario where you have a rickety-rackety bridge where if you're walking across and you weigh too much, you fall down it. So we need science and engineering to build a proper bridge. Let's take a look at this. Okay, you want to cross from one side of the riverbank to the other side, and you happen to have a plank of wood nearby, so you put it across from one side to the other. Well, how are you going to make sure that it's sturdy enough to hold you up and it's not going to snap and you're not going to fall in? Okay, take a minute to think about it. How can you cross to the other side and make sure this plank of wood doesn't break or bend too much? What could you add to the bridge? We're going to pretend we have materials available to you as well. What would you want to add to the bridge? Well, you could put some pillars underneath, right? That would keep it sturdy. So let's pretend we added some pillars underneath. Let's look at a real world example. Okay, here is a really long spanning bridge. There are pillars underneath the bridges that are providing balancing forces. So if there's an object, you're crossing the bridge or a heavy truck is crossing the bridge, that's pushing really hard down on the bridge, but then these pillars are pushing back up. Here's a better illustration. The heavy truck is pushing down on the bridge as it's crossing, but the pillars are pushing up, providing balance and a sturdy bridge. Take a look at the Lake Pontchartrain Bridge. It's a bridge in Louisiana. It's 23 miles long. How did they get it to be so long and so sturdy at the same time? Well, the waters are pretty shallow, so they can build as many pillars as they want that go all the way across this bridge, maintaining our balanced forces, and we can get across it just fine. But now let's investigate a new scenario of building a bridge. Okay, what if you need to cross this chasm? There's two land spaces really far apart from each other, and it's too deep to just build pillars that go straight down the middle. Okay, here's another example of a chasm. You can't just build a pillar. It's too deep. It's too scary. You can't just do that. So what design would you make for your bridge to get across? How could you properly apply force to make a safe bridge? Well, you would want to put in pillars to the sides. You would want to angle them in a certain way to make sure that the force is balanced. So we call these arch bridges. These are probably common to you. You might have seen arch bridges before. So when you have the heavy traffic, you have the force that's pushing down heavy loads, and then you have the beams or the pillars that are going in opposing directions, pushing back up. So you have us crossing the bridge, pushing down on the bridge, and then you have the pillars at a side angle, one on the left, one on the right, pushing back up. This is the New River Gorge Bridge. It's in Appalachia, and it's over 3,000 feet long, and you can see how it's keeping our forces in balance. We can push down on top to cross, and the pillars are pushing at our left and our right, pushing back up to keep the sturdiness and the reliability of the bridge. The tricky thing with arch bridges, though, is because we need our pillars to hold us up, they can only span so much of a space. So an arch bridge is only good for certain spaces. Like this is one of the longest ones we have. So you'll usually see smaller arch bridges, like one like this. And when they need to span longer spaces, they'll become many arches. So like in this picture, the architect combined many arches for one bridge. Same down here. So they work for smaller spaces. An arch bridge is good for smaller spaces. Now in both of our previous examples, in the arch bridge, and we'll call this one the pillar bridge, the pillars are pushing up to be able to support the things on top that are pushing down. But there's another kind of bridge that uses poles. One of the most famous bridges in the world is a suspension bridge. Now, why did the engineers of this bridge have to switch up previous designs that we've already seen? Well, for the purposes of the Bay Area, we could not use a pillar bridge and we couldn't use an arch bridge. We couldn't use a pillar bridge because lots and lots of large cargo ships pass through the bay and go through this body of water. And if we had a bunch of pillars holding up the bridge, then these large cargo ships wouldn't be able to pass through anymore. So we couldn't have that. We couldn't have an arch bridge over this body of water either because it's too wide. It's too long. So the span this is trying to cover, it's between San Francisco and Sausalito, and it's miles long. And so we couldn't use an arch bridge similar to the same reason we couldn't use the pillar bridge, is because we couldn't do many arches because that would end up being like many pillars and not letting things pass through. And a single arch bridge would not cover the span that we needed to. So engineers developed this suspension bridge. So let's talk about how it works. In this suspension bridge, the pushes and the pulls balance each other out because, so here we have the bridge part, the long part, the plank part of the bridge is going across. The heavy cars and the people and the bicyclists are pushing down on the bridge as they go against it. But in a suspension bridge, there are towers. And the towers stand up tall and attach steel wires and cables to them. And so because there's wires attached at the top of the towers, the wires are being pulled up by the towers. So as we're pushing down on the bridge, as we're walking across it, the towers are pulling up. The wires are being pulled up. And in this case, they're being pulled up in opposite directions as well. Opposite but equal directions. And so our bridge is balanced, it's sturdy, it's not going to collapse with all the commuters on the bridge every day. Here's some old construction pictures I thought was cool to show you guys. So here's them building the Golden Gate Bridge. They put up the towers first for the suspension bridge, and then they put in the steel wires or the steel cables to pull up to balance the force of the bridge. And there's one final type of bridge I want to talk to you about. This is called a truss bridge. In the truss bridge, it's basically a bundle of beams or a bundle of poles, so going in opposite directions. This is a really sturdy kind of bridge. So once again, anyone crossing it is pushing down, and then the beams are pushing back up in opposite directions. So here's all the pushes to the right, and here are all the pushes to the left. They're pushing in opposite directions and keeping the bridge balanced. A good way to identify a truss bridge is just look for the triangles. It's the triangles going in opposite directions to balance out our force. So in conclusion, bridges are amazing. They connect cities and you can cross oceans, and they transport people and vehicles and goods across different landscapes. And this is all possible because of engineers who knew how to use science. Like, bridges are incredible. So for our activity, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to put up some pictures of bridges. And just when you're out and about in life, just notice all the bridges around you and now you know all the science that goes into making a bridge and how cool it is. And I bet you'll be able to identify maybe what type of bridge it is. So let's try this example one. This is this picture bridge is called Constitution Bridge. It's in Italy. And I want you to guess, is it a pillar bridge? Is it an arch bridge? Is it a suspension bridge? Or is it a truss bridge? Well, if I'm looking at it, I don't see any pillars, so I don't think it's a pillar bridge. Is it an arch bridge? Well, I do see, it does look like it's in an arch shape, and the forces are going in opposite directions. I don't think it's a suspension bridge because I don't see any towers, and I don't see any triangles or beams going in opposite directions, so I don't think it's a truss bridge. So I'm going to go with it's an arch bridge. So that's my example. Look forward to seeing you guys try to identify different bridges.